Have you ever, just stared at your phone, given your fingers a firm verbal warning not to open a specific app?
Oh, absolutely.
And then watched in just absolute horror as they completely ignored you and opened it anyway?
Yes, it's the worst.
You're literally sitting there, right? Looking at the screen, looking at your own hand and whispering to yourself, don't do it. You do not need to tap that icon.
You are stronger than this.
Exactly. You are stronger than this. And then your thumb it bypasses all conscious thought and taps it.
It's a deeply humbling human experience, honestly.
It really is. There is this terrifying, instantaneous disconnect between, the brain's intention and the body's action. It's like being a passenger in a car where your own hand is gripping the steering wheel.
Yeah, and it really illustrates the central tension we're unpacking in this deep dive. We're looking at this bizarre situation where a habit feels fundamentally stronger than a conscious plan.
Right.
And the truly frustrating part, the part that drives people to the edge of madness, is that in many of these instances, you aren't even enjoying the action.
Oh, yeah, like mindless scrolling.
Exactly. You're mindlessly scrolling or chewing on your lip or eating something you don't even taste. You're completely aware that it isn't serving you.
But you feel utterly paralyzed to stop the sequence once it begins.
The software program is running and you are just locked out of the control room.
The ultimate finger versus brain divide. Which I guess brings us to the mission of our deep dive today.
Let's get into it.
We are taking the source materials we've gathered and unpacking the hidden underlying mechanics of bad habits. We want to understand the actual machinery, why do they feel so incredibly powerful?
And why does fighting them usually backfire so spectacularly? Because declaring an all-out war on our own behavior is usually our default instinct, right?
Right. And most importantly, we're going to explore how understanding the specific language we use around our habits, the actual internal framing, can physically alter the way our brains process behavior.
Because, the psychology of habit breaking is typically treated as a matter of brute force. The prevailing cultural narrative is just that if you have a bad habit, you just lack grit.
You just have to try harder.
Right. But the research we're looking at today approaches it through a radically different lens. It marries behavioral psychology with linguistic framing.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. It suggests that the precise ways we conceptualize and articulate our struggles aren't just passive descriptions. They're active instructions being sent directly to our nervous system.
So how we frame the habit actually dictates our biological response to it.
Exactly.
Well, by the end of this deep dive, you, our listener, are going to understand why feeling the emotion of shame is actually the exact precise mechanism that keeps your worst habit alive.
It's so counterintuitive.
It really is. We have this collective delusion that shame is the punishment that will eventually fix us. We think if we beat ourselves up enough, we'll finally act right.
When in reality, it's the gasoline keeping the fire burning.
But before we get to the shame loop, we have to start at the foundation. The sources bring up a really uncomfortable truth right out of the gate, dismantling what they call the myth of laziness.
Right. Because the reality is, we already know our bad habits are bad. Nobody needs to be educated on the nutritional value of midnight cake.
Seriously, nobody is operating under the illusion that eating a massive slice of chocolate cake at midnight is a brilliant, cutting-edge longevity strategy.
No. We have the data. We know it's not ideal. The prefrontal cortex, the logical planning part of the brain, is fully aware of the long-term consequences.
It knows about the sugar crash.
It knows about the disrupted sleep, the regret the next morning. It knows all of it.
We could literally write a thesis on why we shouldn't do it, and yet we do it anyway.
We do it anyway.
And what happens the next morning? We wake up, that sluggish physical reality hits, and we immediately spiral into character assassination.
Oh, the character assassination is immediate.
We look in the mirror and think, I have absolutely no self-control. I am just lazy. Something is fundamentally broken in my willpower. We don't analyze the behavior. We indict our own identity.
And that immediate jump to character assassination is exactly where the entire process of behavior change derails before it even begins.
How so?
Well, when you label yourself as lazy or weak, you are effectively shutting down the investigation. You assume the case is closed.
The verdict is in. You're just a flawed person.
Right. And by doing that, you skip the single most vital question you could possibly ask yourself in that moment. You forget to ask, why is this habit here in the first place?
What actual tangible purpose is it serving?
Exactly. Because bad habits do not arrive randomly. They don't just fall out of the sky and land on your shoulders to ruin your life.
The core psychological truth emphasized in our sources is that bad habits are functional.
They are functional. They exist because they are providing you with something that you urgently need in that moment. They are a tool.
So we have to start looking at habits not as moral failures, but as solutions to problems.
Yes. Now, they might be deeply flawed solutions. There might be solutions that create secondary problems that are far, far worse than the original issue.
Sure.
But in the short term, in the immediate micro moment of execution, they work.
Like a bad habit might be providing comfort.
Or offering a distraction from a difficult emotion. It could be a temporary escape, or just a fleeting sense of control in a really chaotic day.
Or immediate, reliable relief from a spike in cortisol.
Right.
Let me bring in a highly relatable anecdote from the materials that really grounds this concept. It describes a situation where someone keeps walking to the fridge late at night.
Oh, this is a great example.
They stand there with the door open, bathed in that weird fluorescent light, just staring at the mustard and the leftover takeout.
We've all been there.
And they know they aren't physically hungry, their stomach isn't rumbling, there's no caloric deficit happening, but they keep walking back to the fridge anyway, maybe 3 or 4 times an hour. Well, the analysis reveals that their brain was buzzing. They were dreading the quiet of going to sleep. Because sleep meant silence, and silence meant all their anxious thoughts about work and relationships would finally catch up with them.
So the fridge wasn't about food at all.
Not at all. The fridge was a physical destination for mental restlessness.
Wow. A physical destination for mental restlessness.
Exactly. It was a strategy to delay the inevitable. It was a way to manufacture a task so they didn't have to face the void of the bedroom.
Because the action of walking to the fridge, opening the door, scanning the shelves, and closing it provided a temporary physical distraction from an internal psychological dread.
Which brings us to the concept of the underlying need.
Yes, and the source uses a brilliant analogy to explain this architecture. Think of a massive ancient tree.
Okay, a tree.
When you look at the tree, what do you see? You see the trunk, you see the branches reaching up, you see the leaves catching the sunlight.
Right.
That visible part of the tree is the habit. That is you opening the fridge or mindlessly scrolling social media or hitting the snooze button 6 times in a row or pouring that 3rd glass of wine.
The visible action.
The visible action. But beneath the soil, hidden completely from view, is a vast, complex root system. Those roots were drawing in the water and the nutrients.
The roots are doing the actual work that keeps the organism alive.
Exactly. The underlying need is that hidden root system.
So if you just chop off a branch, if you just try to stop the visible habit through sheer force of will without looking at the roots, the trees are just going to grow another branch.
Because the root system will force the energy somewhere else.
Right. So if the visible habit is scrolling on your phone for an hour in bed, the underlying need might be profound anxiety.
Or if you've been working all day, constantly serving other people, meeting deadlines, answering to a boss, answering to your kids.
Oh, man, yeah.
Your underlying need might just be a desperate desire for a moment of autonomy, a moment that belongs entirely to you, where no one is asking anything of you.
And the phone provides that illusion of control.
It does. And this framing changes everything about how we approach self-improvement.
Let's talk about that. Let's say you have a habit of avoiding speaking up in a meeting at work. Or you always type out a comment on a forum and then delete it before posting.
The easy, culturally accepted thing is to call yourself lazy or unconfident or unmotivated.
Yeah.
You tell yourself, you just need to be braver.
But if we look for the underlying root system, the reason is often safety. Speaking up feels exposed. It feels risky.
So the habit of staying quiet or deleting the comment isn't a lack of motivation. It's a highly effective protective mechanism. Your nervous system perceives a potential threat, social judgment, rejection, conflict, and it executes a habit to keep you safe.
Okay, let's unpack this. I hear what you're saying, but I have to push back a bit because this sounds like a slippery slope.
Fair enough.
Calling a bad habit a solution or a protective mechanism sounds dangerously close to giving ourselves a giant free pass.
I can see how it sounds that way.
Like, where is the line between identifying an underlying need and just manufacturing sophisticated excuses for bad behavior?
Right.
If I eat the cake and I say, oh, well, my underlying need was comfort because I had a hard day, so my root system just needed soothing, aren't I just letting myself off the hook?
It is the most common hesitation people have when they encounter this framework, and the vital distinction to make. Identifying the underlying need is not an excuse. It is diagnostics.
Diagnostics.
Think about a car. If you are driving down the highway, the check engine light comes on and smoke starts pouring out from under the hood.
You don't pull over, stand on the side of the road, and yell at the engine for being a bad, lazy, undisciplined engine.
Exactly. You don't take a hammer and smash the check engine light on the dashboard to try and solve the problem. You open the hood and you run a diagnostic.
You figure out what mechanical failure is causing the smoke.
Right. Treating the habit as an excuse means saying, the engine is smoking, so I'm just going to let it smoke. Cars smoke sometimes. It's just protecting itself from overheating.
But treating it as diagnostics means saying, the smoke is a symptom. It's a data point. Now I need to find out what is actually broken underneath.
And when you drop the moral judgment, when you stop calling yourself weak or lazy, you can finally look at the habit objectively as a signal.
The habit is just a flashing light on your dashboard saying, hey, an underlying need is not being met.
Yes. Once you identify the need, whether it's exhaustion, loneliness, anxiety, or a need for autonomy, you can actually find a healthier way to solve it.
Like if you realize the midnight fridge trips are about avoiding the anxiety of silence, you can address the anxiety.
You can listen to an audiobook to fall asleep or do a brain dump journal exercise. But you can't fix the underlying anxiety if you are entirely focused on being angry at yourself for looking at the mustard.
Right. You can't fix the car if you're just standing there angry at the engine. That is a massive perspective shift. The habit is a signal. It's the smoke, not the fire.
Exactly.
But this leads directly to a mechanical question. If habits are just signals of an underlying need, how do they hijack our bodies so incredibly quickly?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because half the time, my logical brain doesn't even have time to register the signal, let alone run a diagnostic on my root system, before I'm already 3 miles deep into a social media feed.
It happens in the blink of an eye.
It feels instantaneous. It feels like there is zero friction between the trigger and the action.
That feeling of it being instantaneous brings us to the micro timeline of a habit. And this is where the source material makes a brilliant macroscopic distinction between two concepts that we constantly conflate.
The urge and the impulse.
The urge and the impulse. Understanding the structural difference between these two states is the literal key to unlocking behavior change.
So these are not synonyms. They represent two completely different stages in the timeline of an action, even if those stages are separated by milliseconds.
Right.
Let's start with the urge. What is actually happening in the brain and body when we experience an urge?
An urge is a state of loading. It is the strong, rising feeling that pushes you toward something. It's the physical or emotional tension that builds up right before an action.
It is the itch before the scratch.
Exactly. Neurologically, this is your brain anticipating a reward or anticipating the relief of discomfort. Dopamine is starting to pool. You might feel a tightness in your chest, a slight narrowing of your visual focus, a physical restlessness in your hands.
So the urge is just a feeling. It's a physical sensation of pressure. It is not the action itself.
Right.
For example, the urge to check my email. The pressure is building, my mind is pulling toward the phone, but my hands haven't moved yet. The wave is rising.
The urge is the wave rising in the ocean. You can see it building. You can feel the water pulling back from the shore, gathering momentum. Now, contrast that with the impulse.
The impulse is where things go entirely off the rails.
The impulse is the lightning-fast action that occurs before the conscious brain has finished processing the urge. It is execution without consultation.
Wow, execution without consultation.
If the urge is the wave rising, the impulse is the moment you realize you are already underwater, being tumbled around in the surf, before you even consciously decided to dive in.
I love the corporate analogy from the sources here. When I act on an impulse, it feels like my thumb has its own rogue management team.
Yes, the rogue management team.
This management team just completely bypassed all corporate protocols. No meetings were held, no votes were taken. The CEO, my prefrontal cortex, wasn't even in the building.
The CEO was out to lunch.
The thumb just impulsively executed a hostile takeover, opened 3 different apps, liked a photo from 2014, and checked the weather in a city I don't live in, all while my brain's conscious awareness was still buffering.
That corporate bypass is a very accurate description of how the basal ganglia works. The basal ganglia is the part of the brain responsible for habit execution.
And it's fast, right?
It is incredibly efficient. It doesn't want to bother the CEO, the prefrontal cortex, with trivial decisions. If the basal ganglia recognizes a familiar trigger, it just executes the routine automatically to save cognitive energy.
So the impulse is the basal ganglia taking the wheel.
Precisely.
So we have the urge, the feeling building up, the tension. And we have the impulse, the sudden, thoughtless action executed by the basal ganglia. Why does separating these two concepts matter so much practically?
It matters because of the psychological gap between them. There's a micro timeline here. First comes the trigger, then the urge, then a tiny gap in time, and then the impulse fires.
And that gap might only be a fraction of a second long.
But scientifically and psychologically, that tiny microscopic gap is the only place in the universe where behavioral change is actually possible.
Wait, the only place. That's a strong statement.
Yes, because once the impulse fires, the habit loop is executing. The software is running. You are eating the cookie. You are scrolling the feed. You are yelling at the driver who cut you off. The train has left the station.
So you have to catch it in the gap.
If you can learn to notice the urge, if you can feel the itch and just pause for a fraction of a second before you scratch the gap, you reclaim your power of choice.
You allow the CEO to come back into the building.
You give the prefrontal cortex the necessary milliseconds to come online. Assess the situation and say, hold on, do we actually want to do this? Does this serve our goals?
Okay, here is where it gets really practically hard. I hear what you're saying about this magical gap. It sounds beautiful in theory, but how on earth do you train yourself to catch a feeling that lasts half a second?
It's not easy.
Are we all supposed to walk around in slow motion? If I'm at my desk and the spreadsheet gets complicated, the impulse to open a new tab and check the news is so fast, it feels simultaneous with the frustration. How do I catch a ghost?
It requires intentional, deliberate mindfulness. And frankly, it requires doing something that modern society has completely untrained us to do.
Which is?
Sitting with discomfort.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You're deeply conditioned to immediately resolve any uncomfortable feeling. The moment we feel bored, stressed, challenged, or lonely, we have a dozen devices within arm's reach designed to offer instant relief.
So true.
We don't like to feel the urge. We don't like the itch. We want to scratch it immediately so the feeling goes away.
It's like the second I have to read a complicated email from a client, I suddenly feel an overwhelming desire to go clean my kitchen. My brain says, the kitchen is dirty. You are a terrible person for having a dirty kitchen. You must clean it now.
But it's not about the kitchen.
No, it's a desire to escape the cognitive discomfort of focusing on a difficult task.
So the practice, the actual mechanism of change, is deliberately pausing when you feel that discomfort. When you feel the urge to switch tasks or pick up the phone or grab a snack when you aren't hungry, you don't have to fight the urge.
You don't suppress it.
You don't have to suppress it. You just have to name it. You mentally say to yourself, oh, there is an urge to check my phone. Or I am feeling the urge to walk away from the spreadsheet.
Just labeling it.
By simply noticing it, labeling it, and taking one deep breath, you physically stretch out that micro timeline. You stretch those milliseconds into a full second or two.
And that is all the time your prefrontal cortex needs to step in and make a conscious choice rather than an impulsive reaction.
Yeah.
So, let's say I do the hard work. I practice this mindfulness. I sit at my desk, the spreadsheet gets hard, I feel the urge to open Twitter, and I catch it. I feel the wave rising.
Okay.
I take a breath. I've successfully wedged myself into the gap between urge and impulse. The immediate instinct for most of us, once we catch a bad habit in the act, is to violently push back against it.
We want to declare absolute war on the urge.
Right. We want to say, no, I am never looking at social media again. But the sources reveal why that violent pushback is literally the worst strategy you can employ.
It is the absolute worst strategy. And it introduces us to a critical psychological concept. Resistance.
Resistance.
When people finally catch themselves in a bad habit, the typical response is to make a dramatic, absolute declaration of change. The ego gets involved.
They say things like, I'm never eating sugar again, starting right this second.
Or, I am throwing my phone in a lake and I will never look at a screen in bed ever again. I am a completely new person.
The dramatic reinvention. We love the dramatic reinvention. It feels so good to say it. It gives you this massive hit of dopamine just to announce how disciplined you are about to be.
It feels great to say it because announcing a goal actually releases the same neurochemicals as achieving it. But the source warns us that pushing against a deeply ingrained habit with that much sudden force causes your brain to push back equally hard.
And we aren't talking about physical resistance here. We are talking about psychological resistance. It is the internal feeling of pushing back, the feeling of, I absolutely do not want to do this, when a change feels too strict, too sudden, or too heavy.
To understand the psychology of resistance, you have to look at how the primitive parts of the brain process change. The amygdala and the older structures of the brain interpret sudden, dramatic change as a severe threat to survival.
Because the brain is an energy conservation machine.
It loves predictability. It loves homeostasis. It loves the old, paved highways of your existing habits, even if those habits are actively destroying your life because they are known quantities.
The brain knows that if you eat the cake, you won't die today.
Right. When you suddenly declare, everything changes today, no more cake, no more comfort, the brain's alarm bells go off. It perceives a famine or a threat to its coping mechanisms.
And when the brain feels threatened, it becomes highly persuasive. It actively defends the old habit. I love the visual from the source material here.
It's so good.
You decide to ban sugar forever, and suddenly your brain, which is supposed to be on your side, turns into this passionate, high-priced defense lawyer for cake.
The brain comes to court with a tailored suit, presentation slides, and a laser pointer, ready to defend the habit.
Your Honor, my client, the chocolate croissant, has been unfairly dismissed. It has been a loyal friend during stressful times. Remember last Tuesday when the boss yelled at us? Who was there? The croissant was there. The broccoli wasn't there.
It's hilarious, but it's exactly what happens.
And suddenly, all you can think about is the croissant. You didn't even want a croissant yesterday. But today, specifically because you banned it, it is the most important object in the universe.
That is the pushback of resistance. Think of it like two people pulling on opposite ends of a rope. The harder you violently yank the rope toward your side, the strict, new, absolute rules, the harder your primitive brain pulls back in the opposite direction toward the old habit.
It becomes a test of sheer willpower.
And willpower is a finite resource. It eventually depletes. Furthermore, remember what we talked about regarding the underlying need, the root system.
The habit was actually serving a purpose. It was doing a job.
Exactly. So if you violently rip away the habit without replacing it with a healthier coping mechanism, you create a massive psychological vacuum.
The underlying need, let's say it's stress relief, is still there.
You still have the stress,
Yeah.
but now it has no outlet. The roots are still thirsty. So the unmet need screams louder and louder, the resistance builds, the tug of war exhausts your prefrontal cortex, and eventually the rope snaps.
The habit rushes back in to fill the vacuum, usually with a vengeance.
This is why crash diets end in binge eating.
Wow. This makes me rethink our entire cultural concept of discipline. We throw that word around as if it's the ultimate virtue. You just need more discipline. Stay hard, grind it out.
Yeah, but if we look at the mechanics you're describing, a lot of what we celebrate as discipline is actually just this violent, unsustainable game of tug of war.
It's a profound realization. Discipline that creates immense, agonizing internal resistance isn't actually discipline. It is just psychological pressure masquerading as discipline.
It's self-flagellation. True discipline doesn't declare war on the brain's natural pacing. True discipline aligns with it. It works with the nervous system, not against it.
It respects the fact that the brain needs time to build new pathways without triggering the threat response.
Right.
But I have to challenge this because it sounds like a paradox. If we can't be strict with ourselves and we can't make absolute rules, but we also can't just let our impulsive basal ganglia and our underlying needs run our lives unchecked, aren't we just stuck in the middle?
Doing nothing.
Yeah, doing nothing. It sounds like the advice is don't try too hard, but also don't be lazy. How do you actually get anything done if you can't force yourself to do it?
It only sounds like a paradox if you believe force is the only way to create movement. The pivot here is the solution. The goal is not to fight the old habit head on.
Because you can't destroy an old neural pathway by just yelling at it.
Right. The pathway is physically there in the brain.
Right.
So you outsmart it. You bypass the brain's threat response by building a parallel structure that is so incredibly small and non-threatening that the brain's defense lawyer doesn't even bother to wake up and object.
Sneaking past the defense lawyer. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
And this brings us directly to the blueprint for actual sustainable rewiring. We are talking about the architecture of the new path, which relies on the slow, entirely unsexy, but incredibly effective power of gradual change.
The mechanics of habit replacement are fascinating when you look at neuroplasticity. As we established, you cannot delete an old habit. The neurons that fire together wire together.
So the old habit is like a smooth, perfectly paved, brightly lit, multi-lane highway that your brain has driven down 10,000 times.
It is fast, it is metabolically efficient, and it takes zero effort to navigate. The new habit you want to build, the healthier coping mechanism that is not a highway, that is a rough, overgrown, messy path in the middle of a dense forest.
I can picture that vividly. There are branches hitting you in the face, the ground is uneven, there are thick roots to trip over, spiders everywhere. It requires immense conscious effort and metabolic energy to walk that new path.
And the brain, being highly efficient, always wants to take the paved highway. The gradual approach acknowledges this reality. It means you don't try to pave the entire forest path in one day.
You don't say, I'm going to the gym for 2 hours every day at 5 a.m.
That's a cliff. The brain will reject it. The gradual approach means you just walk down the forest path a tiny bit, you clear one single branch, you step on the dirt once.
Instead of sudden, dramatic removals of bad habits, you introduce small, repeatable, highly realistic steps toward the new one.
The sources give a fantastic example of this, the phone rule. Instead of making the dramatic, resistance-triggering declaration of, I will never check my phone in the morning again.
Which instantly wakes up the defense lawyer who argues that you might miss an emergency email.
Right, exactly. So instead of that, the gradual approach is, I will leave my phone face down for just the first 10 minutes after I wake up. That's it, just 10 minutes.
It's what the material calls a polite staircase, not a cliff.
It is designed explicitly not to trigger the amygdala's threat response. It's so small that the brain looks at the rule and says, oh, 10 minutes? Fine, whatever, I can do that. That's not a threat to my survival. I'll get my dopamine in 11 minutes.
Another great parallel they draw is with learning a complex new skill, like a language or an instrument. Imagine a student who is terrified of failure. They feel massive resistance to sitting down and studying grammar for 2 hours a day.
2 hours feels like a cliff. It feels overwhelming.
So they procrastinate. They take the old highway of avoiding the work and watching TV instead.
But the gradual approach bypasses that fear response completely. Instead of 2 hours, the goal becomes, I will open the book and read exactly one paragraph today. Or, I will play one scale on the piano.
It's almost embarrassingly small. You feel silly even calling it a goal.
Exactly. And that smallness, that feeling of slight embarrassment, is actually the superpower here.
Yeah.
A step so small that it feels almost ridiculous, like doing a single push-up, or reading one paragraph, or waiting 10 minutes to check your phone, completely disarms the resistance.
Where there's nothing for the brain to fight against.
You don't need willpower to do one push-up, but here is the neurological magic. Every single time you do that one small thing, you are walking down that overgrown forest path. You are firing that new sequence of neurons.
And every time you walk it, you press the dirt down a little firmer, you snap a few more twigs, you make the path slightly more defined.
And over time, through sheer repetition rather than intensity, the forest path becomes paved. It becomes the new highway.
It becomes the path of least resistance. And once it is the path of least resistance, the brain will naturally choose it because the brain always chooses efficiency.
That's the beauty of it.
I love the forest path analogy. It makes so much intuitive sense. But let's be totally real here for a second. Let's bring this down to a Tuesday night in February.
Okay.
Let's do it. Walking a messy, overgrown path, even just a few steps, is exhausting when you are stressed. What happens when you've had a terrible day at work, your car broke down, you're emotionally drained, you're tired, the new path is full of branches, and the old, paved, brightly lit highway of your bad habits is sitting right there looking incredibly inviting.
You're not going to choose the dirt path. You're going to take the highway.
Right. You are going to take the highway.
You are absolutely right. And this is the inevitable crux of all behavior change. You will step back onto the old highway. It is a statistical, biological guarantee.
Nobody's perfect.
No one builds a perfect new highway without accidentally taking the old exit a few times, especially when cognitive resources are depleted by stress or exhaustion.
Which means the real secret to habit change isn't about perfectly executing the new path forever. It requires us to completely reframe how we handle the inevitable failure.
And that inevitable slip brings us to the most counterintuitive and arguably the single most important revelation in the entire stack of research we are reviewing today.
The trap of the relapse.
Let's talk about the relapse, because for a lot of people, returning to an old habit feels like a death sentence for their progress. They assume that because they slipped, the entire architecture of the new path has been destroyed.
It's the catastrophizing nature of the human brain. The source describes it beautifully as the I already ate one cookie, so I might as well eat everything in the kitchen logic. We have all been there.
Oh, absolutely.
In psychology, this is known as the abstinence violation effect. It is a cognitive distortion where an individual believes that a single lapse in behavior equates to a total failure.
If a person aiming for absolute perfection makes one mistake, the dam breaks.
They think, well, the streak is ruined, The perfection is tainted. I might as well go all out and start over on Monday. It turns a tiny detour into a complete derailment. Like, I didn't study Monday or Tuesday. The week is ruined. I'll try again next month.
Exactly.
But the deeper, far more insidious psychological trap hiding underneath the abstinence violation effect is shame. Most people respond to a relapse with brutal, unforgiving self-criticism. They say things to themselves in the privacy of their own minds that they would never, ever say to a friend.
The internal monologue becomes incredibly toxic. I'm an idiot. I'm so weak. I always ruin everything. I'll never change.
It's heartbreaking.
And the breakthrough insight from the source material, the core thesis I mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive, is that this shame is not a punishment that fixes you. Shame is the exact mechanism that keeps the habit alive.
Let's break down this loop, because this is where the entire picture comes together. Once you see the mechanics of the shame loop, you can't unsee it.
Walk us through it.
Here is the sequence. You are trying to change. You have a moment of weakness or just extreme fatigue, and you relapse. You do the bad habit. You eat the cake, you yell at your partner, you scroll for 3 hours.
Okay.
Immediately afterward, the prefrontal cortex comes back online, looks at what the basal ganglia just did, and you feel intense, crushing shame. You beat yourself up mentally.
Right.
Now, shame is a terrible, highly uncomfortable emotion. It causes a massive spike in cortisol. It feels physically awful to sit in shame. So what does your brain naturally do when it feels an incredibly uncomfortable emotion?
It seeks comfort. It seeks a way to soothe the pain. It looks for the root system to provide relief.
Exactly. It seeks comfort, distraction, or escape. And where does your brain know it can get immediate, reliable comfort, distraction, or escape?
From the exact coping mechanism, the paved highway, the bad habit that you just used.
So the shame over doing the bad habit creates the exact emotional distress that drives you to do the bad habit again to feel better.
You relapse. You shame yourself. The shame hurts. So you use the habit to soothe the hurt of the shame. It is a perfectly closed, self-sustaining doom loop.
You are literally fueling the fire with the water you brought to put it out.
The harsher you are on yourself, the more emotional distress you create, and the more you need the bad habit to cope with the distress of your own self-criticism.
It's a terrifyingly efficient trap, which is why the source emphasizes a completely different approach to the relapse. It introduces the analogy of the coach versus the whip.
It's a powerful way to conceptualize internal dialogue. A whip creates fear. If you are standing behind yourself with a mental whip, beating yourself every time you stumble on the forest path, you might force compliance in the short term.
Fear can be a motivator, briefly.
But you are making yourself smaller. You are operating out of terror. Your amygdala is constantly firing.
And you cannot sustain long-term growth in a state of terror. Your nervous system will eventually shut down from the stress.
Right. Now, a coach, on the other hand, approaches the fumble completely differently. A good coach looks at the player who dropped the ball, analyzes what happened objectively without moral judgment, and says, okay, you dropped it. Why?
Let's look at the tape.
Are your hands in the wrong position?
Yeah.
Were you not looking at the ball? Was the sun in your eyes? All right, we figured it out. Adjust your grip. Let's go again.
The coach operates from a place of curiosity, not condemnation. And this brings us to the concept of compassion. The source points out that compassion is fundamentally misunderstood in our culture.
Oh, completely.
We treat it as a fluffy, feel-good greeting card term. But in behavioral psychology, compassion is a highly functional, highly effective, pragmatic tool.
We have to clarify what self-compassion actually is, because the immediate reaction from highly driven people is usually disgust.
Yeah, they think self-compassion means making excuses. They think it means saying, oh, you ate the whole kitchen. That's fine. You're perfect just the way you are. Consequences don't matter. Never try to improve.
That is not compassion. That's enabling. True self-compassion means treating yourself with the objective kindness you would offer a struggling friend. It means acknowledging the failure, but removing the character assassination.
And neurologically, responding to a failure with compassion physically short-circuits the shame loop we just talked about. If you don't feel overwhelming shame, you don't generate the massive cortisol spike.
And if you don't generate the cortisol spike, you don't need to soothe yourself with a bad habit. You break the cycle.
Okay, but I know what the listener might be thinking, because I'm thinking it too. I have to push back one final time.
Go for it.
The whip is all a lot of people know. It's how they survive school. It's how they survive their careers. If I am totally compassionate with myself every single time I mess up, don't I lose my edge?
It's a common fear.
Doesn't self-criticism As painful as it is, at least provide the fuel to try harder next time. If I'm just nice to myself, won't I just become complacent and never achieve anything?
It is the single most common fear people have about self-compassion. The fear that without the whip, they will just lie on the couch forever. And it's scientifically proven to be false.
Really?
Yes. Studies in behavioral psychology clearly show that harsh self-criticism actually degrades motivation over time. It increases anxiety and depression, which deplete your executive function. The whip exhausts you. It steals the energy you need to actually walk the new path.
So the whip doesn't make you better, it just makes you tired.
Exactly. Compassion, however, is what allows you to look honestly at why you failed without your ego shutting down in defense.
Because if you aren't busy defending yourself from your own mental whip, you can actually look at the underlying need.
You can say, wow, I really slipped up there and spent 2 hours doom scrolling. Why? Because I was exhausted and anxious about tomorrow's meeting. Okay, the root system needed soothing. How do I get more rest and better prepare tomorrow?
A relapse is just stepping onto the old highway for a second. It does not erase the new path you've been building.
The new path is still right there in the forest. It didn't disappear just because you took a detour. You just have to turn around and step back onto it.
You just have to turn around. I love that. It takes all the drama and the tragedy out of it. It's just geometry. You went left, now go right.
Exactly.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, unpacking a completely different paradigm for how to handle our own behavior. Let's synthesize this. We learned that bad habits are not moral failings. They are functional, misguided solutions to underlying needs.
Right. And to break them, we have to stretch that micro-timeline, catching the rising urge and pausing just long enough so the prefrontal cortex can intercept the lightning-fast impulse.
We learned that we have to abandon forceful, dramatic resistance because the brain's defense lawyer will always fight back.
Instead, we have to sneak past the amygdala through the architecture of gradual change. Steps so small, they feel almost embarrassing.
And finally, when we inevitably slip, we have to recognize the trap of the abstinence violation effect and replace the paralyzing, habit-fueling whip of shame with the functional, objective coaching of self-compassion.
It's a complete dismantling of the traditional willpower narrative. It moves us from a paradigm of internal warfare to one of internal negotiation and understanding.
So to you, the listener, the next time you find your fingers opening that app against your own will, or you find yourself standing in the glow of the open fridge at midnight, I want you to remember this. You do not need to panic. You do not need to spiral into character assassination.
The engine is smoking, and that's okay.
You just need to take a breath, stretch the gap, catch the urge, and get curious. What is the check engine light trying to tell you? What does the root system actually need right now?
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about the bad habit you hate the most about yourself.
Yeah.
The one you've been fighting for years, the one that makes you feel the most shame. What if that habit is actually just your brain's clumsy, desperate attempt to protect you from something that hurts? And if that is true, how differently would you treat yourself tomorrow morning?
That is a profound question to end on. A clumsy, desperate attempt to protect you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking beneath the surface, and be kind to yourself as you walk that messy forest path. We'll catch you on the next one.